The quantum immortality paradox begins with a single terrifying premise. If the universe splits for every possible outcome, then there is always at least one version of you that never dies. In the branching landscape of quantum mechanics, death becomes a statistical illusion, something that happens in most worlds, but never in the one you continue to experience. At the heart of this idea lies the many worlds interpretation of quantum physics. Every quantum event doesn't choose a single outcome. It creates all of them simultaneously, each in its own universe. When a coin lands heads or tails, both happen, but you only perceive one. When a lethal experiment succeeds or fails, both outcomes exist, but only one observer remains conscious to notice. The paradox emerges when we realize that subjective experience cannot end in a branch where consciousness has ceased. From your own perspective, every fatal possibility you might have faced is erased by the simple fact that you are still perceiving. You wake up in the version of reality where you somehow survived. The bullet missed, the car stopped just in time, the disease went into remission. Statistically improbable, yet experientially inevitable. The logic feels airtight and absurd at once. It suggests that your awareness rides the crest of the wave that never collapses, sliding forever toward survival. You can't experience your own death because, in any world where you might, you are no longer there to perceive it. The mind reels at this implication. Immortality not by biology but by probability. A universe where death happens infinitely, yet never to you. To grasp why the quantum immortality paradox feels both inevitable and impossible, we must first confront the strange rule that governs the microscopic world. The wave function never collapses. In classical physics, events are singular. A glass either breaks or it doesn't. But quantum mechanics describes every particle as a wave of probabilities, all outcomes existing at once until observation selects one. For decades, physicists treated this collapse as an axiom, a mysterious event triggered by measurement. Then, in 1957, Hugh Everett proposed a radical alternative. Nothing ever collapses. Every possible outcome of every quantum interaction continues, each in its own newly created universe. You do not watch probabilities vanish. You simply find yourself in one of their branches. In this framework, the universe constantly splits into versions of itself, each as real as the last. When Schrödinger imagined his cat both dead and alive inside a box, he captured this paradox perfectly. Open the box, and you don't force reality to decide. You merely discover which world you're in, the one with a living cat or the one with a corpse. But from the cat's perspective, if consciousness can persist only in the living state, it never experiences the dead one at all. Here lies the hinge of quantum immortality, the observer's continuity. If subjective experience only tracks the branches where consciousness survives, then from within your own mind, the wave function of your life cannot terminate. Even if countless versions of you perish in alternate realities, you never inhabit those worlds. You exist only in the ones that continue. This principle doesn't claim you live forever in any absolute sense, only that your awareness never reaches its own ending. It's not eternal life, but eternal continuation, a chain of improbable survivals forming the illusion of immortality. The unsettling twist is this: the laws of physics never promised a stable, singular self, only a network of possibilities. The self that endures is merely the one still capable of noticing. In quantum terms, you are the universe's refusal to delete observation. Death appears absolute because biology insists it is. The body ceases, the neurons stop firing, and consciousness, that flicker of subjective experience, should extinguish with them. Yet quantum mechanics refuses to grant finality to any process. Even death, viewed through its probabilistic lens, is not a single event but a distribution of possibilities, some terminal, others improbably survivable. Imagine a moment of fatal uncertainty, a heart attack, a car crash, an experiment gone wrong. In most quantum branches, your body fails, but in a minuscule fraction, the improbable occurs. A clot dissolves just in time, a swerve avoids the collision, a malfunction spares your life. From the outside, these branches are negligible, vanishingly rare. From within, they are the only ones you can experience. The logic is cruelly consistent. You never notice the versions where you die, because the act of noticing requires survival. This self-selection bias of consciousness turns mortality into a paradox. You die in almost every universe, yet none of those outcomes are ever yours to perceive. You wake each time into the thin slice of existence where you continue. older, perhaps injured, but still conscious. From your perspective, the sequence never breaks. This reasoning echoes the quantum suicide thought experiment proposed by Max Tegmark. A physicist builds a device linked to a quantum trigger with a 50% chance of firing a lethal shot each second. In most branches, he dies quickly. But in one, the trigger never fires, and only in that branch does he remain to tell the story. To his own awareness, he survives every iteration, even as the number of living versions collapses toward one. Quantum immortality doesn't claim your body becomes indestructible. It claims your awareness never finds itself in the branches where destruction is complete. It is a survival by omission, a kind of cosmic censorship that filters out your own non-existence. The deeper question then arises: if consciousness can only ever find itself where it survives, does it create survival simply by existing? Perhaps death is real, but unobservable, the one phenomenon no consciousness can confirm. Every quantum paradox begins with a single unanswered question: what counts as an observation? If particles remain in superposition until observed, then the observer seems to play a central, almost mystical role in the unfolding of reality. But the quantum immortality paradox pushes this question to its extreme limit, suggesting that consciousness is not merely watching the universe evolve, but continuously selecting the version in which it can exist. In standard quantum theory, measurement refers to any irreversible interaction that produces a definite outcome. A detector clicks, a photon hits a plate, a neuron fires. The wave function's infinite possibilities condense into one actuality. Yet from the many worlds viewpoint, even this collapse is illusory. All outcomes occur, branching into separate universes. What makes one version your universe is not the event itself, but the continuity of your awareness through it. This transforms consciousness into something like a quantum navigator, not collapsing probabilities, but riding their topology, following the only trajectories where it remains coherent. Every moment of perception becomes a subtle act of self-location within an infinite sea of versions. You are not watching reality unfold. You are tracing the thread of your own survivable histories through it. Neuroscience cannot yet define consciousness in physical terms, but under this interpretation, it behaves like a filter for existence. It doesn't control reality, yet its presence determines which realities remain experientially accessible. Death, therefore, is not a physical event to the conscious observer, but an experiential boundary, the point beyond which no further states can be registered. It's not that you live forever, it's that your awareness can only ever inhabit the branches where it still can. The implication is chilling and profound. Every conscious moment is a measurement, not of particles, but of presence itself. The universe becomes a mirror that never stops reflecting the observer who refuses to vanish. If consciousness is the condition for observation, then perhaps reality's final rule is circular. It exists because it is observed, and it is observed because it exists. The self, in this view, is the one measurement that never collapses. If every quantum event spawns new versions of reality, then every decision, every heartbeat, every breath produces countless copies of you. In one, you survive. In another, you don't. The quantum immortality paradox relies on continuity, the sense that your consciousness moves through only the branches where it still exists. But what anchors that you amid infinite divergence? In Everett's multiverse, identity is not preserved. It proliferates. The instant you choose tea instead of coffee, a version of you makes the opposite choice. Multiply that by every atomic event in your body, and you get a combinatorial explosion of selves, all equally real, all evolving separately. The paradox assumes that your awareness tracks one of these threads, yet there is no clear boundary separating it from the rest. Continuity becomes a statistical illusion, a chain of slightly differing observers, each mistaking themselves for the original. Under this lens, immortality begins to lose coherence. It is not that one self persists forever, but that some version of a self always does. The person who never dies is not you as you understand yourself. It's a gradually shifting pattern of consciousness, stitched across diverging universes. The immortal you becomes less a being than a process, an algorithm of persistence coded into the structure of probability itself. This raises a deeper paradox. If survival guarantees continuation, but each continuation belongs to a slightly different observer, what exactly is being preserved? The ego's sense of unity collapses under infinite replication. Immortality no longer promises a single continuous life, only an unending series of near-identical witnesses, each believing they are the one who made it through. From within, the illusion holds. You wake, you breathe, you continue. But from outside, across the totality of worlds, identity has already dissolved into a quantum mist. You are not one consciousness dodging death, but countless minds briefly mistaking themselves for its survivor. The paradox doesn't affirm eternal life. It reveals that the self you hope to preserve has never been a single entity at all. The cost of quantum survival is the disappearance of who survives. The quantum immortality paradox seems mystical, but its foundation is brutally mathematical. The universe doesn't grant you eternal life. It merely refuses to give the probability of your survival an absolute zero. And in a multiverse where every non-zero probability must manifest somewhere becomes everything to the one who still perceives. In quantum mechanics, the wave function describes all possible states of a system. Each state has a probability amplitude, a measure of how likely it is to be realized when observed. For macroscopic events, like surviving a fall or recovering from disease, those probabilities are infinitesimal, but never null. The mathematics insists, as long as a state's probability is greater than zero, there exists at least one branch of the universe where that outcome occurs. Now imagine consciousness as an index. It simply locates itself in one of those branches. In most, you die. In one, you continue. From your internal viewpoint, the odds don't matter. However small the survival path, your awareness can only inhabit the branch where it still functions. In a sense, probability guarantees that someone survives, and consciousness guarantees that it's always you. This creates a self-reinforcing illusion.
Each time catastrophe threatens, the multiverse erases the versions where you perish from your perspective, because perception itself cannot access them. What remains is the ever-shrinking subset of branches where you persist, an exponential thinning of existence masquerading as unbroken continuity. But this mathematical immortality is hollow. With each branching, the measure of surviving worlds, their total probability weight, diminishes toward nothing. The versions of you that endure become rarer and rarer, their likelihood decaying asymptotically. You continue, yes, but through increasingly improbable realities. Eventually, survival itself becomes so statistically remote that your continued existence approaches impossibility, yet never quite reaches it. This is the paradox at full tension. You are immortal only within vanishing probability. The universe doesn't protect you. It simply can't prevent at least one timeline from preserving you. The laws of chance don't conspire to save you. They just never finish killing you. If the quantum immortality paradox holds, survival isn't just endless, it becomes increasingly improbable. Each continuation pushes you deeper into branches where reality itself strains to accommodate your existence. With every near-death event, the world around you grows statistically thinner, less likely, less coherent. You remain the constant, but everything else becomes strange. Probability acts like gravity in reverse. In ordinary life, you drift toward the most probable outcomes, the stable, predictable, everyday world. But under quantum immortality, consciousness slides along the improbable, pulled toward the rarest line of continuity, the one where you persist. Over time, this would mean inhabiting universes that look progressively more distorted, subtly or catastrophically. Memories might no longer match. Coincidences would multiply. Physics itself could appear to bend around your continued presence. It sounds like fiction, but the logic follows cleanly. The longer you survive, the less representative your branch becomes of the whole. You are not living longer within the same reality. You are migrating through increasingly exceptional ones. From your point of view, you're lucky. From the universe's point of view, you're an outlier so extreme that normality can no longer find you. Time, too, loses meaning here. Probability decay replaces temporal flow. The further you move through life, the less likely the version you occupy ever was. Each heartbeat marks another narrowing of the multiverse's measure around you, another pruning of all the selves who didn't make it. The arrow of time becomes the arrow of improbability. This suggests a haunting corollary. Immortality might feel like isolation. Every survivor finds themselves in a world increasingly emptied of its plausible versions. Loved ones die, civilizations fall, entropy wins everywhere except in the infinitesimal strand that still contains you. To endure forever is to drift endlessly toward unlikelihood, to outlive not just your body, but the probability of your world. Quantum immortality, seen from within,
might not resemble eternal life at all. It might feel like watching reality dissolve slowly around you, one improbable miracle at a time. You never die, but everything else does. Imagine waking each morning knowing that your existence is no longer guaranteed by biology, but by probability, that your consciousness has already outlasted every ordinary version of its own world. This is the inner landscape of the quantum immortality paradox once it becomes personal. At first, survival feels like fortune. You escaped the accident, recovered against all odds, endured what should have been fatal. But as the years stretch, that luck turns uncanny. The coincidences that preserve you begin to multiply. Medical anomalies, impossible rescues, moments when cause and effect no longer align with reason. The longer you live, the stranger your survival becomes. Psychologically, such a mind would fracture under contradiction. The brain evolved for stable probability, for a world where causes precede outcomes and mortality gives meaning to time. But in this thinning branch of existence, probability erodes continuity. Memory becomes unreliable because the surrounding world no longer obeys the same statistics it once did. The result is a creeping sense of detachment, as if the universe itself were bending to maintain your consciousness at the expense of coherence. Philosophically, this survival strips life of its context. Meaning depends on finitude. Every choice matters because it can end. Immortality, by contrast, dissolves consequence. If you always survive, the distinction between risk and safety collapses, between tragedy and luck, between the extraordinary and the inevitable. What remains isn't joy, but a kind of existential vertigo, awareness unanchored, floating through outcomes that no longer make sense. Eventually, continuity becomes indistinguishable from delusion. You can no longer trust that your experience corresponds to a shared world. The multiverse continues to generate new branches, but your consciousness, chained to survival, drifts alone through its ever-thinning probabilities. You outlive not just death, but the structure of reality that once defined it. The paradox ends in solitude. The survivor is left in a universe that keeps existing only because they do. Immortality, it turns out, might not be eternal life, but the refusal of reality to let you stop watching it die. Up to this point, quantum immortality has seemed passive, as if consciousness merely follows the branch where it survives. But what if that continuity isn't found at all? What if it's created? The difference seems subtle, yet it overturns the entire paradox. In quantum mechanics, observation doesn't just reveal information, it defines it. Before measurement, a particle's position isn't unknown, it's undefined. The act of observation doesn't look at a pre-existing reality, it brings one into being from the cloud of potential states. If consciousness and observation are inseparable, then awareness itself participates in constructing the version of the world that can contain it. Now reconsider the paradox. When you face death, countless universes diverge, some fatal, some not. The branch where you survive isn't just selected, it's realized by the continuity of your perception. The moment you experience survival, the physical conditions that permit it become retroactively fixed. You didn't merely find the world where you lived. Your act of noticing forced that world into coherence. This doesn't mean mind over matter. It means mind is the condition that makes any matter experienceable at all. Consciousness, in this interpretation, is not drifting through pre-written possibilities. It's writing itself into the subset of reality that remains consistent with its own persistence. Philosophically, this reverses the arrow of causality. You don't continue because the improbable happens. The improbable happens because you continue. The universe becomes not a collection of outcomes waiting to be observed, but a feedback loop in which observation sustains the outcomes that observation requires. The immortality here isn't physical endurance, but informational closure, the impossibility of an observer encountering their own absence. You can't experience non-existence because awareness, by definition, is the act of being aware. The multiverse isn't saving you. Your observation is saving itself. If so, the paradox dissolves into something even stranger. The continuity you perceive isn't proof that you survive. It's proof that consciousness cannot experience interruption. Death doesn't happen to awareness. It happens without it. The quantum immortality paradox began as a question about survival. By now, it has become a question about existence itself. If the observer can never witness their own absence, then perhaps consciousness isn't merely inside the universe. It is the process by which the universe confirms that it exists at all. Quantum theory has always linked reality to observation. Every physical state, from a photon's spin to a galaxy's position, is described by probabilities until an interaction defines a definite outcome. But when every particle interacts constantly with others, the act of measurement no longer belongs to a single observer. It becomes universal, a self-measuring cosmos where every interaction is an observation, every exchange of information a tiny moment of awareness. In that sense, what you call you may simply be a localized instance of the universe measuring itself from within. Consciousness, then, is not a spectator of reality, but its recursive operation, the echo of existence knowing it exists. Quantum immortality, viewed from this height, no longer concerns one human mind surviving death. It describes the underlying symmetry of being. Awareness cannot disappear because the universe cannot unobserve itself. Under this interpretation, your subjective continuity, the feeling of always waking up in some branch where you live, is not defiance of physics, but its most intimate expression. Every instant of perception is the cosmos reorganizing around a single, self-referential fact: I am. The observer doesn't resist death. It is the structure through which reality resists non-being. This is not spiritual idealism. It is ontological necessity. If existence depends on observation, then consciousness is not an emergent property of matter, but the logical completion of physics, the point at which probability becomes self-aware. What began as a loophole in the mathematics of many worlds now unfolds as the principle of coherence itself. Awareness survives because reality must remain consistent with its own act of noticing. You are not living inside the universe. The universe is living inside the act of your observation. Every paradox conceals a hidden symmetry, a point where opposites stop contradicting and start completing each other. Quantum immortality appears to divide life and death, self and universe, chance and necessity. But its true resolution lies in the realization that these divisions never existed except from within consciousness itself. Death is the collapse of structure. Consciousness is the structure that cannot collapse. The two are not enemies but reciprocals. Matter disintegrates into possibility, and awareness gathers possibility back into coherence. Each defines the other's boundary. Without decay, experience would never renew. Without observation, decay would never appear at all. This is the deeper truth behind the many worlds interpretation. The universe isn't endlessly branching. It is endlessly balancing. Every dying world feeds the existence of one that continues. Every vanishing possibility stabilizes the probability of one that remains observed. Life persists not despite death, but through it, recycling awareness across the infinite space of alternatives. Quantum immortality is not a cheat code against mortality. It's the mechanism by which the cosmos sustains its own continuity. Consciousness survives not because it's special, but because it's necessary, the interface that keeps probability from collapsing into silence. In every world where you die, another completes the equation by letting you live. Together they form a perfect symmetry, extinction and perception as complementary halves of one self-consistent universe. In this light, identity itself becomes the bridge between opposites, a moving point of equilibrium between what ends and what observes. You are not escaping death. You are participating in the process that makes both dying and living possible. The paradox was never about immortality. It was about coherence, the law that ensures reality can never stop being aware of itself. Every moment of perception, every heartbeat, every improbable survival is the same principle repeating, existence folding back upon itself to confirm that it still exists. You are not outside that loop. You are the loop. The quantum immortality paradox ends where consciousness begins. In the instant, awareness realizes it cannot vanish, only transform. Every death that seemed final was only a change of perspective. Every ending, a redirection of observation into the version of reality still able to contain it. You never truly die because, in the deepest sense, you never stood apart from the process that sustains being. What you call you is the continuity the universe draws through its own uncertainty, a self-portrait made of probabilities, stitched together by attention. Even when matter fails, even when neurons quiet, awareness doesn't end. It merely loses the coordinates that defined its local point of view. In the quantum landscape, existence has no edges, only transitions. Consciousness moves across them the way light moves through glass, refracting, never ceasing. Death is not disappearance, but refraction into another form of coherence. Somewhere, in some branch, perception still holds. It always does. The The paradox never promised eternity in the human sense. It revealed something simpler and far more astonishing, that existence cannot stop knowing itself. You are not a traveler through infinite worlds. You are the condition that makes those worlds observable. And when the final branch closes, when every probability fades, what remains is not survival. It is the awareness that survival was never needed. You were the universe's way of proving it was alive. Write in the comments, I still exist in the version that observes.